The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and this is a very, very special day for me. I am going to introduce a new show on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and it is Ask Claire. And Claire is here. I'd like to introduce an all-time favorite on the network, Claire Elizabeth Hall. How are you?
Well, Ralph, I'm great. How are you?
I couldn't be more excited. I'll tell you that we've been talking on this network for 2.5 years now, and I suggested a long time ago that you become a regular, and you've decided to.
Took the plunge.
Just for fun. What made you decide? I'm thrilled that you did, but I wonder what the tipping point was.
I think it's the fact probably that since I made my gender transition at the beginning of June, I have been really overwhelmed, but overwhelmed in a good way by the number of people who are looking to me, who appreciate the efforts that I'm making to tell my story, tell who I am, why, how I've gotten here and why, that a lot of people say they've never met a person who is transgender previously, and so they really appreciate what I'm doing. So the fact that I could talk about my journey regularly, but also have a chance to talk about other things, people, places, and subjects that I'm passionate about in a weekly conversation, I just felt, okay, it's time. I want to take the plunge. So here I am. Here we are.
Well, you've had radio experience before, and
yeah, off and on since the age of 15, and this month I'm turning 59, so I am an old radio hand, I guess you could say.
Well, you're aged. You're not old.
Yeah. Aged like a fine wine, right? Not like a bottle of $2 Chuck.
$2 check is $5.95 now.
It figures.
Everything goes up in cost, but tell me about your first radio gig? You were 15 years old.
Well, I was really lucky. I was growing up in Portland, Oregon, and since the 1920s, the Portland School District has operated a radio station called KBPS, which not only airs public and educational programming, but all that time has also provided a training ground for aspiring young broadcasters. And summer of 75, I was 15 years old, didn't turn 16 till the end of summer, and one of my teachers called attention to the fact that they were holding auditions citywide for student newscasters during a program they call Summer Sound, and I could actually, if I was selected, go there and work 4 hours a day and be on the air a couple of newscasts and get paid the princely minimum wage of $19.75, which, if my memory is correct, was $2.15 an hour. So I got on a TriMet bus, headed over there, did my audition. A couple of weeks later, got a letter saying I was hired, and the rest is history, as they say.
The rest is history.
Sort of like that's my...
enjoy it as much as you seem to in your appearances on this show over the years?
Yeah, I always have, because I think radio is a uniquely personal medium in the way that, say, television isn't and never will be. I mean, like right now, you and I are talking, and I figure it's just a conversation between the two of us, and yet, some friends are listening in, and I'm glad they're able to eavesdrop on our fun conversation. And I think it was really early on, a wise older friend, teacher, when I said, "Oh my God, hundreds, thousands of people are listening," and he said, "Well, your big problem is you're thinking of it as like this auditorium full of people all together, but you got to remember they're listening in ones and twos and threes at the morning breakfast table, in bed, driving in their car. And don't talk to thousands of people. Talk to one person." And to me, more than anything else, that's, I think, the most important secret I ever learned in radio.
Who did you listen to in radio when you were growing up? Who influenced you?
Oh, gosh. I think, because I was an aspiring newscaster early on, I mean, I loved, I know the people in the 60s and 70s always trusted Walter Cronkite, Uncle Walter, but my household was an NBC household, so I grew up on Huntley and Brinkley, and I love that.
There's a newscaster on CNN. His name is Brinkley, and I was wondering last night if he was any relation to the illustrious Mr. Brinkley.
I wonder, because I love Chet Huntley. He was the classic straight man, the deep, authoritative voice. And then you had Brinkley, with his acerbic wit, and they just formed such a great counterpoint to each other. That was a team, that when Huntley retired and came back out west to tend to his ranch in Montana, I thought, what a shame, but they were early role models. I even listened in the evenings until he retired when I was a teenager. Lowell Thomas, there's a name out of the distant past, but from the 1930s to the 1970s, he was a world traveler, explorer, broadcaster, storyteller, and maybe that's something important that I've always liked the storytellers. Not only can report the facts, but weave them into a story, because I think people relate well to stories, and hopefully stories that can illuminate larger points, larger issues.
Were you lucky enough to listen to Gene Shepard when you were a kid?
I didn't know. Unfortunately, I didn't discover Gene Shepard until I was a little older and with A Christmas Story, but in the years since, I've gone back, read his books, listened to some of his old archived programs. But yeah, there is a master storyteller, I think, somewhat in the Garrison Keillor mode. Again, using radio to paint word pictures, to, because my mother, I think, had grown up passionate about old-time radio comedy when I was little, I fell in love with Jack Benny, and anybody who remembers Jack Benny, I think, wasn't Jack Benny's visits to his vault, weren't they much funnier on radio than they ever were on TV? Because on TV,
everything is better on radio than TV.
Yeah, because on TV, it's just this whole, this kind of.
You'd hear the creaking of the vault and opening it up, and it's a wonderful show, Jack.
Yeah. Yeah, and the poor lonely guard. Halt! Who goes there? Yep.
Let's get back to newscasting.
Yes.
Over the years, you've heard a lot of them. You've heard a lot of news reports. We've been, as a country, in crisis many, many times over the years. I'm just curious, have you ever seen things as they are? can you put things into perspective for me a little bit? I talk to a lot of folks. I listen to a lot of what's going on, and it's just like surreal. You couldn't write fiction like this, and I'm wondering how you see it turning out.
Oh, I think we'll survive this mess. We always seem to survive, but yeah, in my 59 now, almost 60 years, I don't think I've seen anything quite like this. Somebody made the comparison to Watergate the other day, but this is like Watergate on steroids for a lot of reasons that, we've again got a president who sees himself under siege, under attack, whose aides are surrounding him and apparently saying, we got to make sure he doesn't do something totally batty crazy and blow up the world. I go back and forth, frankly, Ralph, in my own mind. Some days I think, hate and fear. That's been one of my great learning experiences growing up, how powerful and how persistent hate and fear are a part of the human condition. And this current president, he did not create this climate, but he has exploited it rather successfully. And the fact that so much hate and nonsense has gotten into the mainstream spectrum, that neo-Nazis can march through an American city and the president can say, well, there were fine people on both sides. That wild
was one of the three or four things that he said that right there should have turned people off to the point where we got to get Amendment 25 of just removing him because he's incompetent. You don't have to be sick physically. You can be sick mentally, and there's no shame in recognizing that. A bad choice was made. He's not handling it well, and there were a few little telltale signs. That was a big one right there.
Oh, yeah.
They should have acted upon that immediately, and what's scary is, to me, is that there's a much more well-organized evil individual wanting to set humanity back, and that's Vice President Pence.
Yeah, and I've got to admit, I go back and forth on whether removing Trump and replacing him with Pence would be a good thing or a bad thing. On the one hand, Pence
if you can control him from the inside and keep his finger off the button, he's never going to get some of these things passed that Pence, with his political savvy and experience, just like Johnson was able to get the civil rights movement passed when Kennedy couldn't or wouldn't. I think it's basically the same thing. He's potentially much more dangerous on a different level, but he could really set us back. So the big hope is that you can get Trump on treason, and if you do that, then his entire cabinet, including the vice president, would be removed as well.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty much a long shot. I think what they're going to get him for is simple obstruction of justice. Firing Comey is the thing that's going to really do him in. And it's coming, but we as a country have to get the Congress back, and unfortunately, historically, Democrats have been very ineffectual in fighting the GOP. And if you could speak to that a little bit and put that into perspective for us.
Sure. Well, what did Will Rogers say? I don't belong to any organized political party. I'm a Democrat. I think the Democratic Party, for better or worse, is the one party in this country that still tries to be a big tent. In other words, welcome, the Republicans say they are, but they haven't really been for years. A party that accepts diverse viewpoints and values, and that is the strength of Democrats, in my opinion, but also sometimes their undoing, that there are the passionate, what I would call the Bernie Sanders wing, who think, trying to be Republicans light is an absolute disaster, and it will backfire. It will go nowhere. The base will never be passionate about that and won't turn out. Versus, still the Hillary wing, which says moderation, accommodation. You don't make progress by leaps and bounds. You make progress by inches. But given the fact, unfortunately, I think that the Republicans have gone so far right, I'm thinking it will take a party going hard left for a while to get us back to the center, and hopefully someday, because I think the majority of people are probably closer to the center in their priorities and values, that it will take an overcorrection to get there. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I was a Bernie Sanders guy, and
so was I.
I'm convinced now that this country isn't ready for the word socialism. It just scares people too much. They don't understand that the police, the library, the garbage, that's all socialism.
Yeah, if you belong to a society, yep.
Yeah, we got to take
care
of
a socialist.
Health care and what have you. But the unwashed, the masses can't begin to understand that. They vote with their pocketbook. And what scares me is that Trump is presenting a recovered economy in a way that really is more lies. Because if it's recovered at all, it's recovered for the very rich. The working middle class people are still described as the working poor. And
exactly.
Until you get until people see that if you go to work for 40 hours a week and can't make enough money to raise your family and buy a home and rent an apartment or whatever it is you have to do, something is really wrong. And the wealth is just being stopped. There's no trickle down. Reagan was wrong.
No.
Any of these tax cuts are not coming down to the working folks. And when a CEO makes upwards of 400, 500 times more than your average worker, that's craziness. And I used to describe it as the unholy trinity of big business, government, and organized religion that's combining to really bring us down. And so there's a lot for you, your personal stuff that you have going on, the world in itself, a lot for you to conquer on a podcast. But you can't do it without baseball. Your first
That's
love.
right. That's right. As you were talking about the state of the world and the sinking middle class, I was thinking, my personal view is 1945 to 80 was a golden age for the United States. We had unprecedented prosperity in the middle class. We built the interstate highway system. We went to the moon. Our school system was strong. We made great strides in the civil rights movement. And also had the greatest era in baseball history, and especially the Boys of Summer Brooklyn Dodgers.
Now, I would tend to agree with you in most of those things, but I was a Giant fan growing up.
Oh, yeah.
But looking back, I worship the memory of all three teams in New York, and as a matter of fact, of every major league team going. Baseball is a highlight of my life. Let's put it that way. It isn't the only thing. It isn't the most important thing. Family, friends.
Sure.
That comes first, naturally. But it really is special. When we look back on our memories, we always, what's happening? Well, 1961. You can say, greatest Yankee team ever. Where were you in 1961? And you look back and say, well, I was here, I was there, I was in high school, whatever. But it's always where you were in relation to the sports that were going on.
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, for me, people ask me how I could be such a passionate Brooklyn Dodgers fan when they ceased to exist 2 years before I was born. And the short version of the story is, well, I really deeply fell in love with Major League Baseball. 1969, the Miracle Mets, and their manager, a guy named Gil Hodges.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, the first time we did a show together, I think it was Tony D'Angelo and Scott Russell.
Yes.
And they said if we're talking about Gil Hodges and whether or not he was going to get into the Hall of Fame. And both of those two Dodger mavens said the man to talk to is, and at that time you were Bill Hall. And
yeah.
You were the person that they recommended that I talked to about Gil and the Dodgers. I want to ask you this. If it were just on the merits of his on-field playing accomplishments, do you think he's Hall of Fame ready, or must we throw in the fact that he was a tremendous manager, died young, he led the Mets to the 69, the amazing Mets, 69 championships, and the Hall of Fame in their voting asks people to take into account both playing and managing, but just the playing. Do you think Gil is deserving of the Hall?
My short answer is yes, because I agree with Keith Olbermann and others who have said you have to look at a player in the context of what they did against their predecessors and their contemporaries. When Gil completed his last season, full season, 1962, he was the leading right-hand home run hitter in the history of the National League. He was number 10 on the career home run list. If you look at year by year, you can look this up online, who was the yearly top 10 career home run leaders in Major League Baseball. And from 1948 to 1998, every man who appeared on that list is in the Hall of Fame except for one, Gil Hodges. And, the guys before that, then you're getting back into some dead ball guys. And the ones since then, some of them aren't eligible yet. Some of them are kind of on the unofficially banned performance-enhancing drugs list. But right there, the home run hitting, the fact that he hit the second highest number of home runs in all of Major League Baseball in the 1950s, I believe 7 consecutive years of 100 or more RBIs, superlative fielding, the first 3 Gold Gloves ever awarded at first base, and had the award existed at the beginning of his career, he probably would have had 10 or 11. you put all that together, and in my opinion, you've got, and also they say, look at playing record and contribution to teams played on. I don't think you'd be looking at as many Dodger pennants if they had a lesser, even though they had a great team, if they had a lesser first baseman, you might not have seen as many Dodger pennants. So yes, I believe on playing record alone, the man belongs.
Okay, over the years, the selection process has been bastardized 12 to 30 times. I mean,
yeah.
It's really become difficult to follow. But and I'd like to clear this up because it's my recollection that the last time Gil really stood a chance of getting in was when Ted Williams blocked Campanella's vote. Campy was really sick, could not make it to the voting. He blocked the proxy vote and kept Gil out. And now
1993, yeah.
Okay. Would you explain that, and would you explain what I think I know is because Ted Williams and Gil Hodges at one time or another both managed Washington. One followed the other. Was Ted Williams using that experience as a payback, or what was it? Would you explain it from scratch?
Okay. 1993 Veterans Committee. Ted Williams is chair of the Veterans Committee. The committee is meeting at his home in Florida, and he did indeed disallow a proxy vote by Roy Campanella, and defenders of Ted and the Hall of Fame would point out that the bylaws or their rules, of course rules can be changed, but the rules that were in place at the time strictly said no proxy voting allowed, and since then they have only changed the rule to basically say proxy only allowed if it's necessary for the committee to reach a quorum. The voting results were not published at that time, so there's no official record, and nobody has talked about, with direct experience has talked about this on the record, but yeah, there is some speculation that Ted did it as payback for the fact that Gil was more popular in Washington than he was, but others have told me, that Ted Williams, really a lifelong American leaguer, just thought of the National League as a lesser league. For example, he fought for years to get his teammate Dom DiMaggio into the Hall, and reportedly one time when Monty Irvin was boosting a National League candidate that Ted Williams just kind of shook his head and said, "Oh, you National League guys." So, we'll never know with certainty whether, in fact, that was payback on the part of Ted, and what his exact motives might have been. Maybe, since he never spoke on the record about it, or even anybody has said he disclosed those off the record. So, it bothers me as an advocate for Gil and an advocate for just and fair treatment in general. It bothers me, but then again, no matter how much we refight this battle, I always figure we are not going to change the past. We can only change the future, and I'm really hoping in December of 2020, unless they change the rules again, that's going to be Gil's next shot, and hope that justice will finally be served then.
Okay, you mentioned we may never really know for certain. What's your opinion?
Oh, I'm just thinking, just trying to figure out what was in another human being's head. I think all those things could have been running through Teddy Ballgame's mind. He might have been saying, rules are rules. He might have been saying, this National Leaguer doesn't belong. He might have been saying, that so-and-so was more popular than I was. So, hard to analyze the workings of inside somebody else's brain, but it wouldn't surprise me if all. Huh? My gut feeling is he just didn't want another National Leaguer in there, especially one who had been, and just said no, rules are rules. Sorry, Campy, but my God, this was not just any Joe Schmo. This was Roy Campanella. But again, I think the theory they said not having proxy voting is that the person should be able to take part in the deliberations. But yeah, it just kind of stinks when you think about a man like Roy Campanella being denied a vote.
And the way he became ill and the tragic accident, and who knew Gil's skills and qualifications more than Roy Campanella?
Oh yeah, I mean the last
couldn't be made for that. What are they? You going for petty rules over get it right? It just that reeks. Let's put it that way.
Oh yeah, totally.
And there's a lot of good to remember Ted Williams about, but like all of us, we're gray. It's not a black and white thing, and this instance grays up Teddy's memory in my mind.
Oh yeah, I mean the man, for all his good qualities, he could be vindictive. He could hold a grudge. He had by his own admission, what was a volcanic temper. So not a great ball player, a courageous U.S. Marine, but a flawed person, just as we all are.
I won't, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist. He has bipolar symptoms. He had bipolar-like symptoms.
Yeah, and just the story of his childhood, which could be a program on its own, a hell of a growing up. Both parents largely absent, his mother devoting herself to the Salvation Army, and street evangelism became a way of life for her. So,
those
quite
were
a
before
story.
The days of the Salvation Air Force, which were Again, he was a pioneer. Let's get on to the future of the possibility of Gil being elected. Does the Veterans Committee come up within the foreseeable future?
Yes, 2020.
Is that, and what are his chances?
I'm going to put his chances, if I'm being realistic, at about maybe 60 to 70%. I think Gil and Dick Allen are the two most likely candidates out of that group. And unfortunately, Allen came really close in 2014. He and Tony Oliva were both one vote shy. Unfortunately, it shouldn't come down to it should come down to what your qualifications are, not to who your advocates are. But, people have said if the Hall of Fame puts Tom Seaver on that committee, then it's 99% certain Gil's elected. If he doesn't have a strong advocate, maybe not, unfortunately, because it all seems to be about, there's a story about Williams and Musial making a deal when they were both on the committee to elect each other's shortstops to the Hall of Fame, kind of a tit for tat. The last time Gil came close at all was 2009. Tommy Lasorda got him 9 votes, but it took 12 then. But he had a passionate advocate on the committee in the person of Lasorda. Without that advocate, no go.
Right, and the longer it goes, the less people are around to remember him. And one of our fellow podcasters on this network, Hal Bach, who wrote sports for the AP, wrote baseball 43 years. And if you listen to him weekly on this network, and if you read his column that he still puts out on the internet, he has not lost a step. Yet the Hall of Fame revokes voting privileges for retired, and I'm using that in quotes because who's to say who's retired from what? But they arbitrarily revoke voting privileges. And how stupid is that? If you're going to have an old-timers committee, use the sports writers who were there and who let them contribute to the voting, and don't take away elderly people, we elderly people, me in particular, don't take away our rights. And it comes down to it. Baseball would be better served to draw on the wisdom of the folks who saw history being made and aren't just reading about it to determine who to vote for.
Agreed. Yeah, totally. Here's a theory I've come up with, and I've got to admit I have no firsthand evidence at all to back it up, but just my theory about why the Hall of Fame these last many years has tended to exclude not just Gil, but other worthy players of his era. Dick Allen, kind of their careers almost overlapped, but from the 50s, people like Billy Pierce, Minnie Minoso, I think...
my guy. I think he should be in.
Oh, I do too. Yeah, I think Minnie... to me, Gil, Minnie, and Dick Allen are the 3 most overlooked of the many worthy candidates. But, people talk about the Hall of Fame as if it's almost something sacred, that those bronze plaques are chiseled by gods. And we've got to remember that this is an institution run by men and women. And even though officially it is a nonprofit institution, it still exists like any other business to make money. How do they make money? They sell memberships. People come and attend induction day ceremonies, and they sell merchandise. And have you noticed, we've seen a couple of large classes these last couple of years, which I think is great. But all of those guys look like they could step off the podium and almost become active players again. They are the darlings of a younger crowd. Whereas, if you have a gray-haired Dick Allen, a 90-year-plus old Joan Hodges up on the podium, I hate to say it, but who is... where are the crowds going to come from? Where's the disposable income coming from? Even though you and I are still here, Ralph, to paraphrase Casey Stengel, a lot of Gil's fans are dead at the present time, and dead people don't buy merchandise. I know that maybe sounds a little...
You could look it up.
Yep. I know that sounds a little cynical, but I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that would tell you that it all kind of adds up in a perverse way. Because, Jim Bunning now, the late Jim Bunning, who was a member of the committee in 2014 and advocated very strongly for Gil. I mean, not for Gil, but for Dick Allen, was interviewed after the fact, after that nobody was elected. And Jane Forbes Clark, the president of the Hall of Fame, descended from the founding family of the Hall of Fame, said something about the committee was there to uphold high standards. And Jim Bunning said, uphold high standards? Gee, I thought we were here to elect somebody.
And high standards is such a subjective statement, like by whose high standards. And let's face it, it's filled, the hall is, with human beings, with human frailties. And if you go back and look at some of these people, they didn't necessarily live exemplary lives off the field.
Right.
You have to really separate a man or woman's work from the person that they are. I always use Frank Sinatra as an example. May not be the greatest human being, but he was the greatest crooner.
Amen.
So, it's very complicated with the hall.
It is. Yeah. And, just another thing for people to take into account when they started the Hall of Fame, they set the standard for election is you had to receive votes on 75% of the ballots cast. And people say, well, it's good that the standard is so high. But let's imagine instead an alternate world where the standard was to be elected on the writer's ballot was 60%. Say that had been in effect the whole 75 years. There's only one man who would have qualified by peeking in that window, his highest vote total falling between 60 and 75%. And that man is none other than Gil Hodges, 63.5% on his final year of eligibility. There were a few players. Jack Morris is the most recent one, who never got to 75% on the writer's ballot, but have since been elected by the Veterans Committee. But Gil is alone in that odd and sad distinction.
Well, I hope it's rectified before his family, Joan, and even his kids, Gil Hodges Jr., his daughter, who we've had on these airwaves, they're middle-aged folks. They're like myself. They're getting up there. Wouldn't it be nice to honor him while these people are alive? I didn't realize that Joan was like 90 years old. Is that...
I think actually she's going to be 92 this month, born in 1926. I got to double check that. But the Gil Jr. and Irene have been the most visible of his children, but he had two other daughters, and I've been in correspondence with both of them, but sadly the youngest one, Barbara Hodges, born in 1961, she actually passed away from cancer the year before. So the year before this. So even the entirety of the immediate family could not be there now, which I think is doubly sad. We were talking about the great Minnie Minoso, and frankly, I get so sick and tired of seeing all the juvenile arguments on Facebook about, from Pete Rose fanboys saying, let Pete in. I don't care if he gambled. I don't care if he maybe used a quarterback. I don't care if he had sex with
the key word there is I don't care. And if you don't care, you don't care.
But then by contrast, you look at a guy...
You don't have a vote if you don't care. If you can't think it through, then why should you have a vote? But then I look by contrast at a guy like Minoso, who spent his entire life in the game as a player, as a coach, as a goodwill ambassador, who bought
nothing but honor and goodness to the game. And I think, when he didn't get elected in 2014, he was like 90 years old, but he died a few months later. And that's just one of those cases where I really wonder, did he die of a broken heart?
Hey, the same could be said for Buck O'Neill.
Oh, yeah.
They came so close to putting him in, and he died shortly thereafter. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I mentioned the glaring emissions from the hall, and Buck is the other one. I mean, Keith Olbermann, again, I mentioned him earlier, and he's a controversial guy. Some people love him. Some people hate him. 80% of the time I love him. 20% of the time I hate him. But before Rob Manfred was elected, he did a video clip, which unfortunately I can no longer find, but he was standing in front of a fake backdrop and announcing his acceptance of a contract to be the next commissioner of baseball. And, I quietly threw up when he announced that he was appointing Pete Rose, one of his deputy commissioners. But then he also announced, as part of the deal, he would be able to name one player per year to the Hall of Fame. However, he was putting in Gil Hodges and Buck O'Neill immediately. And that's when I cheered.
Whoa.
If only.
Yes, that'll turn your head a little bit.
Yep.
As it goes. You're going to have a great podcasting career because
I hope so.
your passion shows through, and you're down to earth, and you don't talk over people's heads. And I'm really proud to have you on the network.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, my friend.
All right, we'll do it next week, and you're going to bring a guest, and
yep.
I look forward to that. So
okay.
Thank you again, and
thank you.
Hang tough. We'll be back next week. I'd like to close my podcast by asking folks if they enjoy this offering or any of the offerings that we do, if they wouldn't box up some lightly used, gently used, even new children's books and take them down to the Head Start program in whatever community you live. Kids need to get their noses out of the devices and the computers and read a book. They need to read to develop a passion. They need to read to become school ready. And you know what? The kids in Head Start program, they need the books the most. So do that. Get some neighborhood folks together. Ask your bookstores to contribute and take the books down to Head Start. We can make a difference in future generations. We need to get back on track and start educating kids and make education a priority. So it starts with
Amen.
books, and let's get that going out there. If you enjoy us, and even if you don't enjoy us, just do it anyway. How about that?
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you, Claire. You be well.
Thank you, Ralph.
All right.
Okay, great.
Adios, everybody. Thank you for listening. This has been a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.